Welcome to Ludicrous Laws, the show where we dive deep into the wildest, weirdest, and most mind-boggling laws from around the world. In today's episode, we're biting into some of the strangest and most ridiculous food laws from around the world. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our weekly dive into the world's craziest rules. Now, let's get started with number 10 on our countdown. Imagine walking into your school cafeteria and finding out ketchup is banned. Sounds like a punishment, right? Well, in France, this isn't just hypothetical, it's the law. Back in 2011, the French government decided to crack down on ketchup in school cafeterias. Why? Because they believed ketchup was corrupting their culinary traditions. Yes, ketchup. Officials argued that French children were losing touch with their heritage dishes, so they banned the sale of ketchup entirely, except for one exception. It can only be served with French fries. Now, here's the kicker. The law doesn't just apply to elementary schools, it extends to high schools too. And if you're thinking about sneaking in your own ketchup packets, well, good luck hiding that from your teachers. But it gets even crazier. Stick around, because one country took things even further by making it illegal to eat. Speaking of strange eating habits, let's move on to Gainesville, Georgia, where eating fried chicken the wrong way could actually get you arrested. That's right, this southern city passed a law in 1961 making it illegal to eat fried chicken with anything other than your hands. The law was originally introduced as a publicity stunt to promote Gainesville as the poultry capital of the world, but it's technically still on the books. In fact, the law has been enforced before. In 2009, a woman was arrested for using a fork to eat her fried chicken, though it was all in good fun. Still, the idea of being hauled off in handcuffs for improper chicken eating technique is both hilarious and absurd. But don't put your utensils away just yet. Coming up, we'll talk about a law that could land you in trouble for eating ice cream. Picture this. It's a hot summer day in New York, and all you want is a scoop of your favorite ice cream. But guess what? If it's Sunday and you're planning to enjoy your treat while walking down the street, you could be breaking the law. This outdated law dates back to the 19th century, when authorities in New York decided to ban eating ice cream in public on Sundays. Why? To promote proper behavior on the Sabbath. The law technically applied to any form of public indulgence, but ice cream somehow became the scapegoat. Although it's rarely enforced today, the law is still on the books in some parts of the state. So, next time you're strolling through New York with a cone in hand, just remember you might be risking more than brain freeze. But if you think this law is old-fashioned, wait until you hear about a rule that bans modern technology from being used with food. Stay tuned for number 7. You think that in Italy, the home of pasta, anything goes when it comes to enjoying this beloved dish. But in some regions, putting cheese on certain types of pasta is considered a culinary crime, and I mean that literally. For example, in Rome, there's an unwritten but deeply respected rule that says you should never put cheese on seafood pasta. While it's not officially illegal, breaking this law in a high-end restaurant could get you a stern talking to or even kicked out. But it gets weirder. In the Emilia-Romagna region, there's a law against using Parmesan cheese in specific ways that disrespect its heritage, as it's a protected product under EU regulations. So, if you're planning to get creative with your pasta dishes, you might want to double-check the local laws first. Still hungry for more? Coming up next, we'll talk about a food law so bizarre it might just change the way you look at vegetables forever. Our next law takes us to Japan, where even vegetables are held to a higher standard. Believe it or not, there are strict regulations in place to ensure that produce sold in markets meets aesthetic standards. That means no misshapen cucumbers, no double carrots, and absolutely no bruised apples. This law stems from Japan's emphasis on presentation and perfection, which extends to food. Farmers have even been fined for trying to sell vegetables that don't meet the required beauty standards. And if you think this is just about pride, think again. Japanese consumers are so used to perfect produce that ugly vegetables often go unsold, costing farmers millions. But here's the twist. Ugly veggies aren't entirely wasted. Many of them are repurposed into animal feed or sold at discounted rates for processing. So, while this law might seem harsh, it's not entirely without purpose. And speaking of harsh, wait until you hear about the law that's taken food restrictions to a dangerous level. So far, we've seen some wild food laws, but trust me, the craziest ones are still to come. If you're enjoying the countdown so far, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. It helps us bring you more of the crazy content you love. Now let's dive back in with Law 5. Let's kick things off in Denmark, where one of the world's most controversial spreads, Marmite, is actually banned. Yeah, if you're a fan of this salty, yeast-based concoction, you might want to think twice before packing it in your suitcase on your next trip to Copenhagen. Why the ban? Well, Marmite is fortified with vitamins and minerals, and under Danish law, foods with excessive vitamin additives are restricted unless they pass strict approval processes. Officials argue this is for public health, but fans of Marmite have called the law ridiculous, pointing out that it's a staple in countries like the UK. What makes this even crazier is that other fortified foods, like breakfast cereals, have also faced bans. So, while you might be able to smuggle a jar of Marmite into the country, eating it in public could technically make you a lawbreaker. But if you think banning a spread is bizarre, wait until we talk about a law involving a certain beloved fruit. That's coming up in Law 4. Alright, this one might leave you scratching your head. In Carbondale, Colorado, it's illegal to sell watermelon. Now, before you start imagining police raids on fruit stands, let me explain the backstory. This law dates back to the 1890s, when local officials banned the sale of watermelons after a particularly rowdy festival turned into chaos. Apparently, people were smashing watermelons on the streets, causing a mess so big that the town decided to outlaw the fruit entirely. While the law isn't strictly enforced today, it's technically still on the books, making Carbondale one of the only places in the world where you could, theoretically, get in trouble for selling a fruit that's 90% water. But don't go anywhere. Next up is a law so absurd it might make you rethink your weekend plans. Beer lovers, this one's for you. In parts of Australia, it's actually illegal to drink beer while standing up. I know it sounds like the plot of a bad comedy movie, but this law is very real. The rule was introduced in some areas to cut down on public drunkenness, with the logic being that sitting down encourages more civilized drinking. Of course, enforcing this law is a whole other story, and in most places, it's more of a relic than a real concern. Still, just imagine getting fined for standing up with your pint at a pub. It's the kind of law that makes you wonder how it even got passed in the first place. But believe it or not, this isn't the only drinking-related law on our list. Keep watching, because the next one is even more outrageous. Now, this next law might leave seafood lovers reeling. In some regions of Italy, eating fried fish on certain days of the year is not just frowned upon, it's outright illegal. This law ties back to religious traditions, particularly around Lent, when Catholics abstain from indulgent foods. But in places like Calabria, local authorities have gone a step further, implementing fines for anyone caught frying fish during these sacred days. What makes this even more fascinating is the cultural clash it creates. While some Italians see it as a way to honor their faith, others argue that food shouldn't be policed. But don't tune out yet, because the number one law on this list is so bizarre, you'll be questioning whether it's even real. Are you ready? Let's dive in. Alright, brace yourselves, because this one is absolutely wild and, yes, completely real. In certain parts of China, eating your own leftovers is actually illegal if you're dining at a restaurant. Here's the backstory. In a bid to combat food waste and maintain appearances of abundance, some cities have introduced laws that discourage diners from taking their leftovers home or even eating what's left on their plate. The reasoning? In Chinese culture, leaving food behind is traditionally seen as a sign of generosity and wealth. It shows that the host provided more than enough. But some areas have taken this custom to extreme levels by turning it into actual legislation. And it gets even stranger. Restaurant owners in certain provinces can face hefty fines if they catch patrons trying to pack up their food. In some cases, diners themselves have been called out publicly for finishing too much of their meal. And that's a wrap on the 10 most bizarre food laws in the world. Which one shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss next week's episode. We've got even more strange, funny, and mind-blowing laws to share with you. Until next time, stay curious and keep those plates legal.